Welcome to the Wild Precious Lives podcast. I'm your host, Jen McEnany, and today I am speaking with the amazingly talented Antoinette Wilson. Antoinette Wilson is a filmmaker with Happens Films, a writer and a producer, and she has an incredible story about following her dreams and passion to get to the point where she is now, where she can make films about projects that she has a real passion for, namely the environment and how we as everyday people can help improve and the world that we're living in. She's got some great stories from when she was very young and volunteering and wanting to save the world and travel around the world on the Greenpeace ship, to then traveling to Argentina and studying, going deep into the world of tango and studying the history of tango and even running a B&B for tango dancers. So she then comes back to New Zealand and then she tells us about how she actually got into filmmaking from all of this. So she's got some incredible stories, but most importantly, I love her message about how if you really have a dream or a passion or something inside you, nothing can really stop that if you want it to if you really want to explore it. So she's got some great messages around that, and I think it'll get you thinking as well. So please enjoy. This is a bit longer, this episode, because there was just so much gold in it. I just wanted to keep going, so it goes for about 50 minutes. So grab a cuppa and sit back and enjoy this episode with Antoinette Wilson. Welcome to the show, Antoinette Wilson.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you here, and I've been looking forward to chatting about your journey, especially seeing as you are our podcast sponsor. So every week I do a little introduction about the film and let people know about the insights that I've had. So I'm looking forward to later on diving into that a bit deeper and talking about, you know, your journey with the film. But to start off, I am really interested in your background and how you came to be doing what you're doing. I know that when you were younger, I know some people, you know, go into their path a lot later on in life, but it seems that even when you were younger, you were really driven with looking after the environment and that sort of thing. So can you start off by telling us a bit about your journey from when you were younger?
Sure, yeah. It has been a bit of a snaky path. So I did, in my early teens, I became really passionate about saving the world, but I didn't really know what that meant. but I had an idea that the world needed to be saved. And it started out, I think, with a sort of a childhood passion for whales and dolphins and wanting to sort of play with whales and dolphins and just becoming aware that that they were endangered. And then sort of, I linked up with the local Environment and Peace Information Centre. And I used to go in there, I used to walk in there every weekend, every Saturday and every Sunday, barefoot in little paisley dresses, much to my mother's complete horror, and volunteer all day, every Saturday and every Sunday. And that was sort of my introduction to the environmental world. But it was a funny introduction because I was working in the shop and I was sort of, you know, selling peace symbols and posters of whales and dolphins, and it was great because I was working with very passionate people, and I got to, you know, visit the ship Gondwana, the Greenpeace ship Gondwana when it was in port, and, you know, do tours around there. And you know, I had this dream of sailing around the world with Greenpeace when I was older. But it was a bit of this is in the early 90s, and I think we didn't have, you know, the internet wasn't sort of a happening thing yet, and so you learnt what you learnt from magazines and meeting people who'd sort of been active. But I feel like there was a real sense of disconnection still to what was really happening and what the real problems were. So I was vegetarian because I'd read that was that was the logical thing to be, because there was enough grain, there was enough land in the world to feed everybody, and too many animals were being fed and so on. And so I was vegetarian, but I feel like looking back, I didn't have a really profound understanding of why I was vegetarian and why I wanted to save the whales and dolphins. And so it was really, so when I was 16, I had the good fortune to be selected to go on an exchange for a year overseas, and I chose Brazil. Again, my parents were horrified. Because I thought that would be a good opportunity to save the rainforests, which I never saw. but I did have the opportunity that year, because I happened to be in Brazil. I was able to apply to be one of 60 students from around the world to attend the 1992 Eco Summit, which was the first Eco Summit, which was held in Rio. And that was just an extraordinarily eye-opening experience, not in the way that I thought it would be, because Rio was just basically cleaned up by the government. So all the poor were shifted out, literally shifted out for 10 days or something. And the whole city was just cleaned up. And it really just brought home to me, all of these people from all over the world who were going to talk about these big issues, but were talking about it in a completely recreated environment that wasn't at all representative of the problems in the world and what needed to be changed. And walking around these sort of conference rooms where it was all very sterile and everybody was wearing suits, and there were all these protesters outside who were kind of like the real people, and then inside there were all these sort of suit-wearing corporates. And it just really, there was this juxtaposition, and it was an eye-opener for me in terms of how environmentalism was, how sort of changing the world was kind of happening on one level and how it wasn't happening on another, and the disparity, I guess. And so going back to that kind of lack of true connection that I think I had before that, it was really easy in my 20s to be sort of distracted from that path. So despite that experience in Rio, or maybe even because of it, in my early 20s, I was pretty easily drawn into my career of choice, which was a great career of choice. I worked in book publishing. I have worked in book publishing ever since then. I still do, a few hours a week, and I love that career. But I just kind of let the whole environmental thing sort of slip to one side. So I was always a little bit aware of that there were issues, but I wasn't really living my ethics, or my ethics kind of slipped off to the side. I think that happens for a lot of us. It's living your ethics or staying conscious and focused on the issues that we are surrounded by is really actually quite hard. That's quite hard work, and so I let it go for a while, for about 15 years.
But yeah, the day-to-day things get in the way sometimes, don't they? Like, trying to find a job that brings in money and follow that career path. How old were you when you went to Rio? Were you 16?
16, yeah.
Wow, what an amazing
quite
experience.
Young, eh? Looking back, it seems like.
I can see why your mum and dad were worried. So, yeah, that is just incredible but there was something in you at that age that you just knew there was something going on. And I'm interested, were your parents environmentalists in the day? Were they bit of the greenies, or was that just you coming from you and something inside?
Yeah, they weren't. They weren't environmentalists at all. They were super liberal, I mean, I was very open-minded, incredibly open-minded parents, great parents, but not environmentally focused at all. Dad was doing his thesis at varsity on, I can't remember exactly, but something like ownership of the seabed and outer space and Antarctica. That, like, those places where ownership didn't exist, certainly at that time.
Yeah.
In the 1970s. And I remember he was a bit of an anarchist. He liked to call himself an anarchist in those days. And I remember there was a sticker on the stereo that said "Taxation is theft." It's always really stuck with me. So there was sort of, he was doing a PhD in philosophy. He was a thinker, and we were surrounded by all university academics, and there was a lot of kind of thinking going on. But it wasn't. There wasn't a strong environmental focus at all. I don't know where that came from. It was I feel like I've always had a bit of a sense of something not being quite right in the world, and maybe that's a little bit in me as well, and needing for things to be right. And I think now that that's where it came from. But it's a little bit of an unthought through thing just yet.
Yeah.
Still working on that.
So you then sort of that that just lay dormant for a little while, you were saying? So you followed your career with books, and so where did that lead you, and what did that involve?
So I've been really, really lucky in so many things in my life. And so for me, it was good fortune. My dad was a publisher. So I sort of went off and did my travels and so on in my late teens, early 20s. And when I came back midway through the university year, I'd already started my degree and left it. And so I needed a job, and I took a job with him. And I'd always worked for his publishing house in one way or another through my teens. And I had always imagined that I would work in something to do with language, or I still had this a notion that I would sail around the world with Greenpeace. And so, yeah, I ended up taking a job with him and just finding my place. It was really, I'm so lucky, and it was quite incredible because it was a very profound kind of finding of place. I never went back and finished my degree. I didn't need to. It wouldn't have advanced me at all. I was doing English and classics, but it wouldn't have made any difference because I was learning from the ground up, and I learned from some of the best editors. I had great fortune to work with editors whose, back in those days, you still keyed in all of the corrections. You didn't do everything on screen. And so I was working from hard copy and seeing all of these editorial changes on paper and keying them in myself and being able to ask questions. And so I was really lucky. And then, of course, eventually you want to get away from your dad's business and go out into what you think is the real world. So I went and worked for Random House in Sydney, and later for a little company. That was really interesting because I discovered at Random House that I didn't really like being a cog in the wheel. You're just one little piece of this massive operation, and I learnt lots and I made great friends, and I had a bit of fun, but I didn't like being this little piece. I'd come from, I think, 4 or 5 years of being part of the whole publishing process and really just loving the whole process and loving getting to know our authors and being part of, not just producing their books. I was in production, but also, the publicity and just everything, every part of the publishing process. It's so exciting. And then here I was just working in production, and it was just like, yep, got another cover off to print, and had another chat with a printer about what paper we're going to print on. I like that stuff, but I didn't want that to be all I was doing. So I ended up.
Yeah. I was going to say, did that sow a bit of an entrepreneurial seed in you, or what did that get you thinking?
I think that, contrary to what I imagined, because at that stage, in my mid-20s, I had this dream of taking over the editorial offices of Random House New York by the age of 40. I don't know why I came up with the age of 40.
Love it.
In a minute, I'll tell you what I did at the age of 40. So that was my kind of big dream, was to climb the corporate ladder in my 20s. And so it was a bit of a surprise even to me that at the end of this, I was on a maternity leave contract for someone's maternity leave contract at Random, and I was offered a permanent position, and I didn't take it. I took instead a job for a little company also in Sydney called Pluto Press Australia, and it was 4 days a week, and it was a production management job, and it paid as much for 4 days a week as Random were paying for 5, so bonus. And it was a little company, and I think what I realised in that 2-year stint in Australia was that I like small. Small is better, and I've always liked small. I've always had a preference for small, but there was that notion of needing to climb the corporate ladder and make it big, and I think that was my realization. Actually, that's not me. It doesn't suit me. I don't thrive in that world. The politicking and Random was a little bit catty, and there was some stuff I didn't like about how people were, how people worked together in the higher sort of echelons where I never quite reached. So, so all good. So yeah, and then I ended up actually going back and working with my dad again, and really kind of getting back into the family business and relishing recognizing that we were small and had all the challenges of small, but that many of our challenges were the same challenges that large companies have, and actually easier and somehow kind of more enjoyable to to deal with in that smaller context.
Mm. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I work for a startup company as well. And what I like about that is it's so agile. If you want to make a
Yeah,
change, you can do it without going through any red tape. If you want to
yeah,
try something new, you can do it and see how it goes. And if
yeah.
it fails, it's okay because it's learning. So,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And you can fail, profoundly. But you can also, and yeah, you can take really small steps, and you can try crazy stuff that you just don't get to do and often and big. I mean, that whole world has changed a lot in the last 15, 20 years, but there's a lot more kind of creativity allowed, I think, now in larger companies. But certainly in my experience at that time, it was far more creative and interesting and exciting being in a small space.
and I also love that you were saying you didn't go back to the university degree because you realized it wouldn't benefit you. And that's what I also love. I think it's great to, if you know your path and you know where you want to go and you're learning from experts in the field and from people who
Yeah.
really know their stuff, I think it's fantastic that we don't feel like we have to have a tertiary degree of some sort to
Mm.
succeed as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I have never looked back on that. I've never regretted it. I did a sort of a master's in can't remember what they actually called it, but a master's in editing, but which it wasn't a university thing, but it was just some extra study sort of later on, and that was great. But I've never looked back on not finishing university. It wouldn't have made any difference at all.
Mm.
I find that really interesting. And so now when I meet younger people who are kind of in that process of thinking about where to go, where to go. I mean, university is great for many things, but I really believe that we need far more people out learning from experience and trade and more practical skills for the world that we're going into. And
Yes.
I don't believe that university has the place in the future that it had in certainly, over the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s of last century. So it's interesting times for university.
It is. It
Yeah,
actually will be interesting to see where it is,
mm,
what changes they've made or, the different courses that are even being offered in 10 or 20
yeah,
years' time.
yeah, yeah.
So
And
you,
hopefully a real leaning towards people being more practically skilled rather than, yeah.
exactly. So you then went back to the family business and you worked in that. And I'm keen to hear what you said. You had another change when you were 40, but what else was happening before then? Because I know that you went overseas and lived again over in South America. Was it?
Mm.
Yeah. So when was that in the big journey?
So, so when I was 30, while I was living in Sydney, because I moved there, my marriage had ended, and I got married quite young, and it ended very amicably. And but when I moved to Sydney, I'd moved there for the job. I didn't know anybody, and so I sort of thought, well, what would be a good way to meet people? And I saw a sign in a shop window for tango classes, and I'd always been keen on tango. I'd always liked the look of it, and so I started up tango, and I just completely fell in love with this dance. It's such an extraordinary connecting dance. It's social tango, not talking about stage tango and flicks and kicks and all sorts of acrobatics. I was learning social tango, where it's really this connection between two people in an embrace walking around a dance floor, but it's also about the connection of all of the different couples on the dance floor and how they use the space on the floor, and how they use the music and use the music to use the space. And it's just, I mean, it's such a weirdly complex dance, and it has a beautiful history and extraordinary music. Just this huge history of music as well that has developed in line with the dance over the last century. And so I just became completely passionate about that. So when I was 30, I moved to Argentina. And I said to my dad, I need to go to Argentina. I need to go and dance tango.
I'm off again.
I don't want to stop work. Can I take my job with me? And he agreed, which is wasn't just a dad thing. He does actually value me as an employee, so he could see the benefit of keeping me on. I still do 8 hours a week for him, so that's carried on right through. He's trying to get me up to 16, but but so yeah, I was full time working from a little apartment in Buenos Aires, and so I would go out dancing at about 10 o'clock at night and come home at 3 or 4 in the morning, and then
wow.
I'd get up and start work at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and when New Zealand was coming online, I would have already done a bit of work, and then I'd have my pillow on the desk and I'd just snooze for a bit, and then Skype would bing at me and I'd be, yep, here, ready to go. So it was, funny years. I was there for 6 years.
What a great experience.
It was amazing. It really, I mean, it was a beautiful experience. I ended up running a little B&B for tango dancers. And I have this, I always, I have a need to follow my passions, my dreams, and it's, I don't think I've ever had more than $7,000 in the bank at one time. That's the most money I've ever had, and that was because I cashed in my super, because I thought I wasn't going back to New Zealand, so I wouldn't need it, and I hadn't saved up much anyway. So, and so I've never really earned a lot of money, but I've always lived really, really well. And I'm lucky, my privilege is that I come from a middle class white family. So I have innate privilege, educated, and I've had good luck, but I've also had good privilege. And it does that, living in Argentina was a really good insight for me into what that privilege actually means, because you think that you've just made choices that have enabled the wealth in your life, and I say that I'm rich with time and rich with experience and rich with just joy and passion for life. I haven't needed money to make all of that happen, but I've certainly seen people without the privilege that I've had, and without any of those other things as well, standing in line for the bus for 2 hours every morning and 2 hours every night in order to go to a job that they hated, and then to go home to a substandard living space that, with too many kids and not enough money to be able to thrive. And so I'm very aware of my privilege, even though I've made choices that I could have made. I could easily have made choices that led to making good money. I'm sure that I could have been a very kind of financially successful person, but as it is, I tended never to make much money, but to always live well somehow. In my context, my idea of living well. So in Buenos Aires, I started up this little B&B for tango dancers. So social tango is quite a complex world. So when you go into the social environment, there are lots of codes from way back in the 30s and 40s. So a man to ask a woman to dance, he nods, he makes eye contact and nods. And if she wants to dance with him, then she nods back. And if she doesn't, then she just pretends she didn't see. But it actually takes quite a long time to make eye contact for long enough for that exchange to happen. And there's a whole dance floor in between, because the men are on one side of the room and the women on the other. And a man would never approach your table and just ask you to dance, because that would be the height of rudeness in the traditional setting. Not all of social tango is like this anymore, but I preferred the traditional setting. And so I would take single women who had come to stay with me because they'd never visited before and didn't know the codes, and I'd take them into that environment and sort of show them how it worked. It was really fun, and it was really interesting because you really saw how, like, the women who were successful weren't necessarily the young beautiful woman. They were the women who had confidence and presence and some sort of spark, some sort of joy, or something that made a man kind of go, "Ooh, I want to dance with you." And it wasn't because she was young or she had nice legs or whatever. It was because she had a certain kind of joy in her face, or
it's fascinating.
really, yeah,
So many metaphors for life in this tango. I
yeah,
didn't realize tango was so involved like this in the history. It's amazing.
yeah.
You could write a film just about this.
And people have.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no,
right.
and and books. It's in the last sort of 10, 20 years, tango's really sort of had it was it was illegal to congregate in groups during the 70s in Argentina, and so tango, or 60s, 70s, so tango sort of had a down time, and it's really kind of boomed in the late 90s, and so yeah, it's going through it's a crazy world. So now, I mean, I started tango because I wanted to meet people in Sydney, but now I could go to any city in the world and walk into a tango venue and instantly have a community. And I really loved that about it. There's a real sense of community in the tango space. It's there is that sort of egalitarian, if a woman doesn't want to dance with a man, she just pretends he doesn't exist, which is great.
Nice and easy.
But there is still a very old fashioned, I also studied feminism at varsity, and there was a bit of a thing for me there, because I'd never been a skirts and heels wearing person, and here I was in 9 centimeter heels and pretty dresses. I never quite got into makeup, but I would put on mascara and some lippy and do my hair and worry about what I was going to wear each night. And that wasn't my background. That wasn't really how I'd ever sort of been, and so I did feel the conflict there.
Challenged you in other ways.
It did, yeah. And there was a point at which I started kind of waking up in the morning and thinking, actually, I don't want to worry about what I'm wearing tonight. I want to think about something else. So it was very much my world. I ended up running a festival for 3 years, a sort of a boutique tango festival that nearly gave me a breakdown every year, because it was, just a week of events and classes and workshops and 3 different languages and 3 different currencies, and it was just all kind of quite intense. And I was managing the school that I was learning to teach, and decided that wasn't my forte, and ended up sort of just managing the school. I always end up in admin. Doesn't matter what I do. I follow my dreams. I end up in admin everywhere I go. I can't get away from it. But I did sort of reach a point where I started thinking, I love this life, but I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if it's fulfilling enough anymore. But for those first 4 of the 6 years in Argentina, I could not have been happier.
Yeah.
I'd walk around the city, just it's such a in the 30s, 40s, it would have been such a beautiful city, and now it's kind of a grungy version of its best self. But I would look around and think, I can't believe I live here. And then in my last 2 years, I'd be like, oh God, everybody's so annoying, and there's just such a difficult culture to live with. It's innately distrusting and untrustworthy and really corrupt, and we don't have that in New Zealand or Australia. We have corruption. We have it at a level I don't think we're barely aware of, but it's not innate. It's not something that you experience between friends, and over there it's very much part of the culture.
So it was time to come home. You knew when it was time to come home.
Yeah.
It
took me a while. It took me over a year to decision, because I was so sure that I was going to be there forever. But yeah.
And then you came home, and where was the next step?
So part of the decision to come home was that I became a little bit. I was a bit unwell for I think that lifestyle of dancing until 3 or 4 in the morning and drinking a lot of coffee every day and pastries isn't ideal. And I have always had sort of gut stuff, the kind of gut stuff that's pretty kind of fashionable these days. Everybody's suffering from it, and I think there's a good reason for that. And so I was kind of an early adopter of gut pain, and I started just doing a bit of research, because I've always had a natural inclination towards the so-called alternative therapy rather than conventional medicine. I've always had a bit of a distrust of conventional medicine, and I think it's part of that whole. Everything, they seem disparate, the environmentalism, the tango, and then coming to bringing health into it. they seem like quite different subjects, but to me it's all interconnection. The interconnection of everything is bound up in all of these things, and for me, health feels like something that needs to be approached from in a holistic way, and conventional medicine is like this. They've got this jigsaw puzzle where they seem to think that they can just do this piece and not worry about this piece down here. It's so I started looking for ways to heal myself, and came across a book that was quite life-changing for me called Nourishing Traditions by a woman in in America called Sally Fallon. And it was hugely eye-opening to me about where food comes from and how it's grown, the ethics around it, but also what's in most of the stuff that we buy in the supermarket that we actually really can't call food. And so this was a huge eye-opening experience reading this book, and it started this journey that led me back to New Zealand and back to I ended up in the Wairarapa in the south of the North Island of New Zealand, and I was working still for my dad. And for I was freelance by this stage and working for other publishing houses and happy in my work, but I started growing veggies and needing to sort of understand more about all of that sort of world. And so I took a job, a voluntary job for 4 hours a week at a local community supported agriculture market garden. So a veggie box scheme, They do veggie boxes. They were doing veggie boxes for about 100 people a week at that stage. And I just went to learn because I'd started growing veggies and I didn't know what anything was. I realized that I had never seen a strawberry in the garden.
Yeah.
I grew something called kale and didn't know what to do with it at what point was I supposed to harvest it and if I harvested it too early or too late, was it poisonous? Like literal kind of complete disconnection from where my food came from. And so I just took this voluntary work harvesting courgettes and beans, I think, for about 4 hours a day for, once a week, and it just about killed me. I'd come home with prickles all up my arms from the courgette plants and absolutely ruined. I'd have to lie down for 2 hours, but yeah, so I loved this work. I loved being outside. I loved having my hands in the soil and being under the sun, and it just felt so healthy. And I ended up taking on a day's work and then 2 days paid work and then 3 days and then 4 days. So at the age of 40, I didn't take over the editorial offices of Random House. I took over the packing shed of a market garden.
And were way happier for the decision, I'm sure.
I was so happy. Yeah, I was so happy. It was awesome work. I loved it. It felt healthy. Yeah, it felt good. It felt good for me.
Yeah, and then it's like you've come back full circle now to discovering those inner things that were happening when you were younger as well.
Yeah.
So how did this then lead you into filmmaking and producing and writing?
It's a bit of a journey, isn't it?
I'm fascinated. I love it.
So while I was working at Eco Farm in the Wairarapa, and I had done a permaculture design course, and that was really important learning experience for me. Permaculture is an extraordinary approach. I mean, it's such a natural and logical approach, but somehow extraordinary to us in this day and age to how we live and interact. And it's all about working in line with nature. And it was really awesome for me to see the extent to which I had not been living in line with nature, and how much more natural and right it felt to begin doing that. So I started sort of thinking about how I was living and wondering about living in community. I started wondering whether that I was on my own again, and just thinking about resilience and what resilience means, and that you can try and sort of be self-sufficient on a piece of land, and feel that I was starting to feel that I needed to be stronger. I needed to grow my food know how to do things. But I started also to understand that resilience is about community. It's about the people around you, and being able to rely on other people to help you, and being able to help other people. And so I started looking at communities, and I was sitting in front of my computer one day researching communities in Australia and New Zealand, and an email came in with a subject line, free rent in an eco-village for a year. And I thought, yeah,
that's meant to be. Click.
And then so I read this long email, inviting people to come, and they were inviting, I think, 9 people to come together to live on a piece of land in Gippsland, Victoria, for a year-long project exploring what a one world footprint would look like. So at the moment, I think Australia would need 3 worlds, 3 planets, planet Earths, to carry on consuming the resources that it consumes. And obviously there's only one planet Earth, and so what would we need to do in order to stay within that one world footprint? And they were looking for experienced permaculturalists, and I thought, well, I'm not experienced, so I'm no good for this. So I forwarded it on to a friend who applied and got in. And I thought about it, and then I thought, no, damn it, I really want to do that. I'm just going to apply anyway. And so I did, and I was accepted. And I was in denial about the fact that they were also making a documentary over the course of the year. And I'm appalling in front of a camera. I mean, I'd never really been in front of, I knew that I was appalling having my photo taken, so I assumed I'd probably be pretty bad in front of a moving pictures camera as well. And so I was sort of in denial about that. So I turned up for this, I sold, or I gave away heaps of stuff. I put what I could into storage in a friend's garage, and I just up and moved to Australia. And I thought that I had this idea that we'd be doing everything from scratch. So we'd have no power and no water, and we'd have to collect our rainwater, and we're going to be out. I thought we were going to be out in the middle of the desert. I had no idea where Gippsland was, and I didn't really look into it very well. And so I was sort of imagining, just so much learning over this year. I was so excited about everything that I was going to learn. And so I arrived on this property just out of Moe in Gippsland, 20 minutes from the dirtiest power station in Australia.
Yes.
Chugging its disgusting toxic fumes every day, on the edge of Moe, which is not the most inspiring town if you've ever been there. And we had a railway line and a motorway on one side of the property. So my little cabin would shake at, from 3 o'clock every morning. And but it was a beautiful piece of land, a really beautiful piece of land. And this extraordinary person or family who own it had basically sort of given it to this project for the use of this group of people to make this exploration in this documentary. So it was it had mains water and there was power, and we were doing everything from scratch. I know, that's what I thought. And a couple of people had cars. I was like, cars? What? And so there was a big discussion. We were 9 people with kind of this shared vision, the vision of this project, but 9 different ways of coming to it, very different ways of coming to it. So some people were all for using power tools, and some people didn't think that we should be using any power at all. And so we had, it was complex. And we had the back of a little shed, and 9 people in a 2-element hot plate and a bucket for washing dishes, So we had to build a kitchen. Some of us didn't have anywhere to live, and so we had to build homes for people on the property. I was living in a beautiful little 10-metre square cob cabin for the year. I was really lucky. We had an earth ship and an earth bag house, and so exploring different ways of building and with natural materials as much as possible. We retrofitted the shed into a beautiful kitchen, and over the course of this year, we sort of really struggled with the community aspect of it, learning to live in community. That was the big challenge for the year. But the outcome was this beautiful documentary called A Simpler Way, Crisis is Opportunity. I ended up coming on board with Jordan, the filmmaker, and Sam, his co-director, Samuel Alexander. And I came on board as a writer, and we came up with this beautiful film, the following year, and it's had over 1 million views on YouTube now, and received awesome feedback, which is great for a team of people who had never made a film.
That's so good.
Yeah,
And I'm going to put a link to the film in the show notes too, because I was looking at it, and you've given it free on YouTube, but you can also pay a donation because you want to spread the word. But obviously, if you can donate, it's better to help support this great venture.
The making of more films.
Yeah.
Yeah. So over the course of that year, Jordan Osman, the filmmaker, and I hooked up and sort of started thinking about, like, we made some just little short films about other communities and interviews with permaculture people, just to sort of explore those ideas. And we really saw that there was a niche online for high quality short films in particular, in that space, that was sort of educative and most importantly, inspiring. Mm-hmm. Films that inspire people to make change in their lives. And film is such a good forum for doing that. And this short form is so ideal in today's world where everybody has a short attention span, so and limited time and so on. So at the end of the project, we came up with this idea for I was keen on bringing Jordan back to New Zealand and sort of traveling around New Zealand and meeting people who were what we called living the change. So people who were making changes in their lives or in their communities that would inspire other people to make positive change in the face of, climate change, financial fragility of, a fragile financial market or a fragile economy. Just all of these big issues that we're facing that so many of us don't know where to begin tackling and put in that too hard basket. So we started traveling around New Zealand just making short films, and we also were scoring these really awesome interviews with people who had important, interesting, amazing stuff to say, but whose stories we couldn't necessarily weave what they were saying into a story that would make a short film. And so we ended up thinking, well, we really want to use this material, and how can we use it? And so the idea for Living the Change, the feature-length documentary, came out of that, where we would, let's make a feature-length documentary that brings together all of these short stories that we've been making, short films that we've been making, but interweaves them with the big picture message that these people are offering. And yes, it's been a bit of a journey. It was an unexpected journey. We weren't planning on making a feature film in it, so it took us 2.5 years, and it was great fun. And the outcome has been really successful. Really neat. So we're sort of, two self-taught and experienced, 3 years experience making films, but we feel like we've got about 18 short films up now and 2 feature films, and this is the future for us. We're on a path that we really, really love, and we've got exciting projects coming up, and another 4 short films coming out this year, and it feels like the right path to be on.
And are the films that are coming up, are you still all based around this topic about, environmentalism and what we can do when people making changes? Is that where your sweet spot is?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because it's what we're living. It's because it's what we want to learn. So we're making films, basically, we're trying to educate ourselves as well. We want to educate and inspire ourselves, and educate and inspire our audience. And there are so many people out there who are doing incredibly inspiring things, or living in inspiring ways, and so it's a great privilege to be able to share those messages, and it's important to us. Nothing would make us sort of just do a paid job for someone to sell as a service or to sell a product. Like, this is very much a passion career that we've chosen. So we do it on a very, very low budget. We choose to live simply and live on probably quite a lot less than most people would be able to, could probably live doing this, I guess. But so we do it all by donations and crowdfunding, and we earn from YouTube ads. So we'd love not to have ads in front of our films. Somebody got in touch once and said, great ad, but shame about the Monsanto, a great film, but shame about the Monsanto ad beforehand. Oh, we'd love to take the ads off, but at the moment, that's quite an important revenue for us. So yeah, it's a passion project, but it's great fun.
It sounds incredible, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about the subjects that you're filming and telling stories about, but also to support independent filmmakers who are trying to make a difference in the world. I think is really important. So I think it's great that you can sort of tell us about, you know, the journey that you're on and how it is difficult to fund that. So little things like the ads, or if you make a donation, if you watch it, all of that sort of stuff makes a difference.
It makes a huge difference. And like we've got a Patreon page, so we've got long-term supporters, and who might, you know, from $1 a month to $50 a month, but they're, you know, the majority of them are complete strangers, and they just are really supportive of film as a medium for expressing this message, and they're supportive of our work, and it's a beautiful feeling. You know, every time we get a new, you know, you've got a new Patreon email, and it's, you know, that level of that level of support. Even I mean, you know, people say, how can we help you? And there are all of those ways, but even just watching the films and sharing them is what we consider that, you know, support. When Living the Change came out, Living the Change is the first film we've made that we're selling it, so it's $10 to buy it or $5 to rent it, and we tried to keep that low as low as we could. And some people said, oh, it's, you know, that's way too low, and, you know, you're undervaluing the work. And we don't feel we are at all. I'd love to make it free. But that one had a much higher budget than our other films, which, you know, we had lots of generous contributors for that as well, which was awesome for the post-production. But the thing for us is to get the message out to as many people as possible, and to make it as accessible as possible.
So it's about trying to get that balance between keeping the money coming in to be able to do it, but keeping it accessible and getting it out there to as many people. Yeah. Well,
and to live well, you know, we still want to thrive. We just happen to not need a huge amount in order to do that, because we've found a way to sort of make that work. But also really important.
Well, please be sure to check it out, everyone. We've got our bit.ly link for it, bit.ly/change WPL. So change while precious lives. So so check it out. But I love it. And I suppose what was, just a question about the film itself, what was the favourites? Because as you said, there's lots of stories about people all around New Zealand doing these amazing things. What was your favourite interview?
Yeah, it's such a hard one, because they're all so great, and there were so many we interviewed that we couldn't include in the film as well, which was hard. It's funny. I always say that my favourite interviewee is this lovely lady, Helen Dew, who's 82, going on 30. She's got more energy than anyone I know. In fact, when we held a screening for Living the Change in her little hometown of Carterton with 5,000 people, she stood outside her supermarket all day the day before handing out flyers, and they had 250 people turn up at the screening.
Oh, that's so good.
Amazing. She's just got so much energy. She works for a group in New Zealand called Living Economies, and her passion is complementary currencies, and the community connection that comes through exchanging and or buying and selling using complementary currencies, but keeping the keeping it all local and in a sort of a closed loop, you know, system, and keeping the wealth local as well. And she's just got so much passion for this, you know, for promoting this in her community. And she's an incredible gardener and seed saver and general sort of community hero. So yeah, she was. There's a point at the end of her interview where she says, where she's talking about a success that she had, and she said, and you know, that's what feeds me. That's what makes me that what she knows that she's giving back to the community that's given so much to her, and that sentiment always makes me tearful every time I watch it. And I've seen this film many hundreds of times, backwards and forwards, and it always makes me emotional. So yeah, that's mine. Just that sentiment. I think we're so disconnected from how our world works, from where the things in our life come from, and from our community and the people around us. And she really embodies where we need to be, I think.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I do remember that struck a chord with me too when I saw her.
Oh, cool.
Now we need to wrap up soon. It's just been such an amazing interview, but I want to ask you a couple of questions before we finish. So the first one is, what would you now tell your 16-year-old self? Have faith in yourself. I think I have always been fearful of trying too hard at things, and fearful of making mistakes. And I think that's stopped me from doing. I mean, I've always sort of followed my dreams and I've had a great life, but there's a lot that I haven't done that I could have done if I'd had more faith in myself. Yeah, that's a good one. And then I'm so inspired by how you really haven't let any barriers stop you from trying different things, following your dreams. So what advice would you give to people just around that, if they've got a passion or if they're just not sure or they feel stuck in what they're doing? What advice could you give?
Yeah, interesting. I think one of the most important things we can do is question everything. And so if there are barriers, or if there's something that's if there's, potentially a dream or a passion that you could be following and something's stopping you, questioning why, all of the reasons why that might be. And many times it's because society says it's not the done thing, or it's because you can't afford it. And I would really always question first why you think you can't afford something. And it could be for very good reasons, but it could also be because society is suggesting that the right way to live is this way, which is an expensive way, an unnecessarily expensive way. And I would question all of the reasons why you need to spend money on this, or this, and then look at how that's dominating the choices that you make in your life. And I think many people could be living a life that they would be happier choosing if they didn't have these expenses, this tie to an expensive lifestyle that we're sort of told is the right way to live.
Like you even said about, you thought that you were on the path climbing the corporate ladder and that was the way to go, but then you realized, hey, hold on, actually it doesn't quite sit with me. I don't want to. Why should I be climbing the corporate ladder? It's because we're conditioned to sort of think that that's the way to go, but there's so many other avenues. If you can just stop, take that breath and just have a think about, what do you really want out of life, and what are the real priorities? Yeah. And what are you doing that society's telling you should do, and do you really need to be doing it? Yeah. Antoinette, it's been such a privilege and a pleasure to talk to you today. I've come away so inspired. Oh, cool. And thank you. Just talking to people like you who are making a change in the world by just doing something that they're passionate about is incredible. And, you're really spreading the message and getting it out there. And I think you're having an amazing time while you're doing it, meeting these incredible people like Helen. So thank you very much. And I'm going to be very keen to keep abreast of all the projects that you guys are doing. So make sure you keep us in the loop. Thank you. Yeah, we'll do it. And thank you for your support of Living the Change. But thank you too for what you're doing, because it's the same thing. And I think it's important work. Yeah. Thank you. Cool.